Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Stephen McCain podcast where I interview people making world-class decisions in the field of human optimization and performance. Welcome to 2024, and I am a sucker always for a great comeback story. So I wanted to kick off this year with a really good story because I know a lot of us are probably trying to make some positive changes in 2024, maybe some big ones. And so hearing somebody who's overcome some big health challenges might be some good inspiration. My friend Jesse James Carroll tells us his story. He was in our military, he was a hard charger, and he went through a health crisis where he was actually on a list for a liver transplant, and he just took the bull by the horns and got control of his health by fasting and learning about how to use his metabolism through various training, how to eat differently. He shares all of it with us, and I think it's a great way to start off this year. He's a wealth of knowledge. He's a good friend of mine, and so I hope you really enjoy this episode. Jesse, welcome to the Stephen McCain podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Stephen.
Yeah, we met at the World Peptide Congress, and one of my favorite conferences in the world is just phenomenal. And you got introduced to me after I got off stage, and I had asked, I said, I want to hear people's story, and if you have, because potentially I was looking for people to be on the podcast, and you have a very, very interesting story to me. And we've been chatting on the phone a lot, and we've gotten to this thing now where you've become not only like friends, but it's allowed me to see how much you really know. And so I'm really excited to have you on here. And yeah, man, let's do this. Maybe if you could just give us a little bit.
Dude.
Yeah, give us a little bit of your background in terms of, I know you were in the military, and thank you so much for your service. And just kind of start us off a little bit about like your history, and we'll kind of get into your story from there, and then what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks again for having me on here, Stephen. Yeah. As you were giving your opening lecture at PwC, one of my colleagues reaches out, and he's one of our clinical pharmacists. He reaches over to me and he hits the elbow on my side, and he just says to me, he's like, Jesse, he's like, I don't care what you do. He's like, you have to go and talk to this guy after he gets off this stage. He's like, it has to be you. You have to go and talk to him and just share your story about like where you've been and what brought you to where you're at today, because it really just aligns with a lot of the parallels that you shared on stage that day. And frankly, the stuff that you shared really, you know, hit me in my soul, to say the least, because it spoke directly to some of my experiences that I've had along my walk, if you will. And so I served, as you mentioned, I served in the military back in 2006 through 2009, kind of during the height, one of the heights of the Operation Enduring Freedom War. So Operation Enduring Freedom, for those of you, was OEF and OIF. So you had Operation Iraqi Freedom and an Operation Enduring Freedom, which was Afghanistan. So I was in the U.S. Army. I was an airborne infantryman, and I spent 15 months over in Afghanistan.
Wow.
And then, that's a long time. Yeah.
That's a long time.
Yeah. The Army really knows how to lengthen deployments, if you will. It's historically speaking, the other branches don't spend that length of time overseas. The Army tends to spend a lot longer, but with a larger fighting force. So it makes sense, right? Like, this is not a tit for tat kind of thing. We're all a team, and everybody has a specific specialty and a role to play.
Yeah.
So, that being said, I mean, when you're in the military and you're a combat fighter, you have a large belief, almost like an ego, if you will, that you carry. Like, you think you're part of you think you're part of the elite in a way, right? You think that you're elite fitness. You think that you're in elite health, overall well-being. Like they teach you and breed into you. You only need 4 hours of sleep to be able to effectively be good at missions. And while there may be time frames where that's reasonable, in a long term, in the long end term of your life, it doesn't really play very well from a longevity standpoint. But I didn't know that, right?
Yeah.
What they explained and taught me made sense.
And how
So
old were you? How old were you during all this?
I was a baby. I was about 20. Oh, I got in at 21 years old, and I finished up my time right after I turned 24. I had a couple of unfortunate setbacks with a parachute accident. I had a minor malfunction, and I had some damaged vertebrae, bulging
Wow.
disc, herniated discs. I removed the meniscus in my left knee, and one of the common threads in the military is 800 milligrams of Motrin to
Yep.
manage pain and
Yeah,
inflammation.
that's the same with athletics, and I got that down to a science where I started using a leave. A leave was actually what used to be a prescription. I think it was Celebrex maybe before,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
sodium or whatever it is, and then they made it over the counter. And I used to say one to leave in the morning, one in the evening, and if I kept that in my system circulating, it allowed me to actually perform in my upper 20s. Otherwise, I couldn't do it. And so
yeah,
you are in this 20 age range where you are kind of invincible. That's, when you're in your 20s, you can take a lot of punishment,
yeah.
but it
Yeah,
sounds
and knowing to yourself. I think that that's
yeah,
key. Like, is to say is like, it was unknowing to me that I was actually punishing my body, right? Like,
yeah,
you hear it from the older, wiser, maybe men in your life you that you don't bring close enough in your circle. That they're like, hey, be mindful of this stuff now because it's really going to come back to bite you as you get older.
yeah,
But when you look at just 30 years old, you don't consider 30 years old as older, right? Like when you hear that in your 20s, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other because you're thinking, okay, when he says when I'm old, that's like 70, 80, 90 years old, right? Like
yeah,
that's what the guy's talking about.
yeah,
So fast forward, I ended up getting out of the military. And I ended up in Gainesville where I, reconnected. She was my girlfriend at the time. She's my wife today. Blessed that, Sandra's. I've got an amazing wife that has, like, she's truly been kind of like the guiding force that led me into healthcare and ultimately got me to a place where I'm right where I need to be in
yeah,
this space, which is cellular medicine now. But that being said, I got into healthcare. I became a respiratory therapist. I specialized in pediatric and neonatal intensive care. I did a lot of what's called ECMO or extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. So it's a type of bypass that you can put people on, predominantly pediatric and neonatals. We do it a little bit in adults as well, but it's a way to kind of help people's organ systems critically heal, mostly the heart and the lungs while you're managing a very severe illness. And that being said, so here I am. I'm in this system, in the healthcare system, right? That's like our healthcare system, and I think I'm doing some groundbreaking stuff.
mhm,
And a few years go by, and we move to where we live now in South Florida, and that being said, I my job changed where I took on shift work in the at night shift, and more importantly, I wasn't doing a lot of that life saving stuff. I wasn't doing the ECMO anymore. I was kind of became a glorified knob pusher, if you will, and doing
oh,
sometimes the term is neb jockey or nebulizer jockey, where it's like you get a call from the nurse and it's like, hey, my patient needs a nebulizer.
and you did the shifts work, which threw off your circadian rhythm, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I would work from 7 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning. So as you would
Oh,
assume, I was really awake from about 5 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I would go to sleep at about 10 o'clock in the morning. So when you start to figure out the expanse of what was actually going on, I was getting very little sleep. So much to the point where my skin actually started to have like a greenish hue to it, if you will.
wow,
I had a lot of like green under my eyes, and it just wasn't healthy. More importantly, that that lifestyle really accelerated. I about 5 years into working in the hospital. and I was just done with that shift work. Fortunately, a friend of mine who he was a rep of ours, but he became a friend of mine. He actually brought me into the medical device world, and that was kind of my first step out of the healthcare system, which I think you and I have kind of talked about this before as more of like a sick care idea, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a band-aid here, band-aid there. You're not really better. You're just alive enough. We're probably going to see you in 30 days, but make sure you stay out of the hospital longer than 30 days so everybody gets paid, right?
Yeah.
And that just didn't sit well with me. So here I go. In 2017, I get out of the hospital and I start working in medical device as a clinical specialist, right? So kind of a subject matter expert in critical care medicine and mechanical ventilation. And that was really, honestly, Stephen, that was where I had my eyes open. It didn't necessarily change my lifestyle. Like I was still kind of eating what I wanted to eat, living the way I wanted to live, worked out like a lunatic, but not necessarily correctly,
What do
right?
you mean it worked out like a lunatic? Like you worked out a lot?
Yeah, like, but more, not only worked out a lot, but I didn't care what you threw at me. I was willing to do 3 hours worth of work at a heart rate that was just like unsustainable to the point of, vomiting at times,
So
or dry heaving.
you were still in your 20s in the military in your mind, even though you were
100%.
now in your 30s.
100% with
Got it.
multiple injuries. Yeah, with multiple
Yeah.
injuries, right?
Yeah.
And so that being said, yeah, I just was in that mindset. It was that grinder mindset of like I can do these things, and I'll use my mind to will myself to do these things. And I traveled a lot. I mean, in 2019, I slept in a hotel 208 nights of the
Oh,
year.
wow.
So I think there's about 250 working days in a year. I spent about 208 nights in a hotel outside of my own bed, not on my own sleeping schedule, still waking up at about 4 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning today, nowadays, but I go to bed at 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. So
Yeah.
it's a whole different ball game. I track my sleep. I do lots of stuff that I hope we get into, as
Yeah.
we go along. But that being said, 2019 or 2018 is really where I want to start at. When I talk about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, that disease process is in our culture today. It's kind of now just becoming a disease process that I would say rolls off the tongue, right? It's becoming more. It's not as um, you know it was always thought that, oh, like alcoholics get these things, or somebody
Yeah.
who has just this horribly morbid diet gets NAFLD, right? Or I mean, let alone a term like metabolic dysfunction or metabolic syndrome. Like, what is metabolic syndrome? You talk to most doctors in the healthcare system, and they don't even understand what you're saying when you say metabolic syndrome.
Yeah. So real quick, just so that everyone knows, when you talk about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, you're talking about a diabetic liver, essentially, right?
That's correct. Yeah, and the interesting thing about when you say that is like, so somebody that would otherwise not know, they hear the word diabetic, and they're expecting a number of clinical signs on a laboratory test that actually defines that what you're talking about, right? Like a diabetic liver.
Yeah.
But the reality is none of that stuff was actually being seen on my labs at all. I had some slightly elevated LFTs, which are liver function tests, right? So my ALT, AST levels were just above the normal range, as people would say, right? Realistically living in
Yeah.
the 50s and 60s of my ALT, AST levels. Nowadays, just for some contrast, there is my ALT and AST live at 20 and 17. So
Yeah.
they're about half of that. More importantly, what starts to happen when we're talking about NAFLD is there is a massive amount of accumulation of visceral fat, specifically around that organ system, that's stifling and essentially strangleholding that organ system, not allowing it to go through its normal cellular processes.
And
You
are
know, s
are you suggesting this is what was happening to you? Is that why we're talking about this?
yeah, so yeah, yeah. So I'm saying this because in 2018, I'm walking around thinking that I'm just because everybody would always tell me when they would see me. I used to weigh 255 pounds. It's part of the,
And how
one of the
tall are you?
5'9".
Jesus, that is heft. Now, when you say I was 250, are you referring to I was obese or like overweight, or you weren't jacked and like a strong man, right? You were.
So people that saw me and were around me and were in my circles, I mean, the term was, Jesse, we always thought you were just a husky guy, right? Just a big boned guy. Because in that 255 pounds on DEXA scan, when I really started to figure out what was going on with me, which will, I hope I'll get to, is I had 190 pounds of skeletal muscle on me at 255. So I was a pretty jacked dude. I was a big guy. I was a strong guy. Like I told you, I worked out like a lunatic. I would work out for, I mean, one of the founder of the organization I work with now, you know, he talks about how I would do 3.5 hour workouts on a Saturday. I would stay for like multiple classes on a Saturday just to feel like I put in the work for the day. But I say this because in 2018, the fun stopped. And NAFLD, the reason why I brought NAFLD up is because it's largely a asymptomatic disease process, meaning, and to the listeners, asymptomatic meaning like you don't have a reference point for it. It's not showing up in labs and you have no external explanation. There's no symptoms that you are experiencing, right? Other than when I ate something, Stephen, anytime I ate something, I couldn't even finish my meal without having to remove myself from the table and relieve myself in the men's room, go to the restroom. On average was going to the restroom 6 to 10 times a day, and I've actually heard this referred to as cop gut, like as a comparison, if you will, a parallel to the stressful job that a lot of our public servants, civil servants have. Especially the ones that are kind of really in the line of fire in some of their roles. They call it. They usually equate it to stress, and
Interesting.
so it got so bad that in 2018, I actually started to experience outward symptoms. And that's why I brought up NAFLD, because it had accelerated in me internally that I was having to relieve myself of gut pressure. I could not actually eat anything. I was trying to find all kinds of remedies for this to actually alleviate what was going on in my right upper quadrant. I mean, if I explained to you the level of discomfort and pain that I was in on a daily basis just to get up and get out of bed, I mean, I wouldn't wish this on my worst enemy, frankly. I I went to see a primary care, again, antiquated healthcare system. Nobody, integratively talks to each other or has a plan for you. Continued my frustration with the healthcare system. They sent me to an endocrinologist. Endocrinologist starts doing some look on some things, and she was the first one that actually said to me, she's like, I really think that you need to go and see a liver doctor. And so I took that and I actually went to the VA and I had a liver ultrasound done. And in the middle of the ultrasound, Stephen, the ultrasound tech leaves the room in a hurry, like frantically in a hurry, not like excuse me, I need to get up and go to the restroom. Like frantically drops the ultrasound handle, okay, leaves it on my stomach, runs out of the room, and brings back in the interventional radiologist. Okay, like the actual physician who would read your radiographs or your ultrasound and tell you what your diagnosis is on your little sheet of paper.
Yeah.
And so the radiologist comes, he puts the ultrasound back on my right upper quadrant, and he's like, "You need to go to the hospital immediately." And I'm like, I'm at the hospital. We're at the VA hospital. He's like, no, you really need to go and see a liver specialist like tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, what do you mean? They're like, your liver is enlarged 3 times the size of normal. You have hepatosplenomegaly. We will print out a report for you, and we're going to refer you out of the VA healthcare system. And
Wow.
so I got a referral to go down to the University of Miami, and I went and saw a hepatologist there. And again, that just that I sent my wife comes with me. she's pregnant with my son at the time, and this was kind of like my the amount of frustration that I had right when I left this doctor's appointment is here I am in a you know a great medical institution. It's a renowned medical institution. They know what they're doing, right? For the most part, you assume. And the doctor comes in and tells me, "Yeah, there's nothing that we can do. You have these things. There's nothing that we can do for you. You're gonna have to change your diet. You're gonna have to change your lifestyle." And then after that was it. It wasn't like, hey, here's the steps on how to change your lifestyle and how to change your diet. Here's the things that you could consider, like intermittent fasting or prolonged fasting, like no guidance whatsoever. And essentially, it's like, yeah, like I'm just here to tell you, you got to change your lifestyle. What does that mean? What does
Yeah.
that even mean when you tell somebody that right after you have a radiologist telling you, like, you need to go and seek help, like now? So you've got these conflicting things going on, right?
Jesus, that sounds like a bad day for you. Like, that really sounds like that was a bad day. Like, h what did you like, when you went home, like, what did you do, like, after this? Like, how did you what was your game plan?
No, well, so most of the way that I'm home, on the way home, I'm just like the only thing I could kept thinking about was like I have like this is on me now. Like I don't know I didn't know what the answer was, but I knew that it was all on me. Like everything that was going to happen going forward was going to be on me. Nobody was going to come beside me and do it with me. It was going to be my responsibility. And also, what also was hitting me is, like I told you, my wife's pregnant with my son, and I have a young daughter at home. I had a 4-year-old daughter at the time, and I don't want to like sound morbid about it or anything like that. It wasn't like they were like, "Oh, you're gonna die," but they were starting to tell me to consider potentially becoming, because of the level of visceral fat that had accumulated in my liver. They were telling me to be considered for a liver to be put on the liver transplant list. And I'm
Yeah,
30, I don't know, 33 at the time, 34, something like that,
yeah.
right? So it's like 10 years has passed, right? Like get out of the military, only a decade of my life. And I have a physician telling me to start kind of preparing my head around the idea that I may have to be put on a liver transplant list.
Wow. I mean, I don't mean to cut you off, but like I do want to say this because so many people I find that are fantastic people in this new health space,
Yeah.
the real healthcare system, have these amazing stories. Like I'm always like, "What's your story? When was your darkest hour? Tell me about it," because I know the way that you are engaged and in this particular field, the way you go about it is fueled by something very personal. And that's kind of the thing that I talked about on stage, and I haven't really told my story. I think I'm going to do a solo cast on this podcast where I kind of just lay it on all the cards on the table. But for me, it was my fiance at the time shaking me while I was completely paralyzed. I was so drunk and I was puking all over myself. And I remember having an out of body experience saying, "You're going to kill yourself if you keep doing this," and I just couldn't couldn't cope with the fact that I was retired from sport that I loved, and I went from
Yeah.
being one of the best people in the world at something to having nothing. And
Yeah.
I still don't think that I mean, I quit drinking, but I remember the next day I woke up and I said, "This is all on me. I have to figure this out. I got myself into this, and now I have to get myself out of this." And that starts almost like a rebirth, right? I'm sure that it's something clicks in your brain, and then you go on a new mission, and that's why you're here today, because you successfully completed this mission, obviously. So tell us, like, what did you do? I want to hear about, like, how you
Yeah.
navigated this.
Yeah. So today I actually part part of my professional life is involved with something called the New BioAge Wellness Network, and I'm the director of professional and business development for them. So I work very closely with a lot of physicians and a lot of prescribers in this new medicine field, and how do we bring this integrative approach to medicine that involves, small molecules like peptides, but also, metabolic analysis and cold plunge therapy and so on, bringing in the actual boat of the people that have done the research, but more importantly, and you just said it, they've lived the experience, right? Like they went and they sought out the experience. So he's obviously the founder and the CEO of our company, but he's a close friend and a colleague of mine. That's Leonard Pastrana. So I mentioned to you, like these symptoms started in late 2018. So now, just fast forward a few short months into 2019, and I mean, just so we're clear, we were deep diving on peptides at this time, and that was part of my research. You asked, like, what did you do, what were you thinking, and I had dabbled in or heard about peptides, and even played with a little bit of peptides in the gray market a little bit, but like, very unaware and not well researched, if you will, right?
Sure.
So and we're very close, and so he comes over and he just hands me a bottle of 500 microgram BPC capsules, right? He knew I was having a lot of metabolic problems. I showed on several DEXA scans visceral fat levels that were essentially unscalable. I had 4.7 pounds of visceral fat around my organs, and just so there's a quick understanding of that, the significance of that is, as I went on my journey of this reset, this snap that you talked about, I actually reduced that down to 0.73 pounds. So it's
Wow.
effectively lost 97% of that visceral fat to restore my health and my metabolic health, allowing my metabolism to go back and heal itself, right? Like actually leverage the power of my cells to reignite them so that they could cellularly signal themselves appropriately, and my body would find a way on its own to restoration. And today I have not one remnant of that fatty liver disease.
Wow.
Frankly, when the doctor sees me on occasion, which I don't really go to the doctor that often, it's just like when I have like my annual that I'm kind of like forced to go. They kind of argue with me like, you still have fatty liver disease, and I'm like, but I don't, you know so we can have the conversation till we're blue in the face, but here's the data. Here's the DEXA scans, here's the blood test that I usually get blood tests at a minimum once a quarter now, to really keep an eye on things. And man, that's the other thing, is like me taking a proactive approach in my care, which I realized was only going to be able to do from a standpoint of paying on my own. Yes, I've got health insurance, and that's fine. You have that stuff there for like catastrophic and emergent events. But the lion's share of my healthcare that manages my well-being and my longevity and my goals as a father and as a husband, and as a man in my community that I get to serve in, is like, hey, I'm going to have to take my own approach on this, which means that the doctor's not going to lead me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, just real
I
quick, I just want to jump in real quick on that. Like,
yeah,
and maybe this has been expressed so many times on so many podcasts, but I'm going to say it again. Like, you pay out of pocket for real healthcare. Like,
that's right.
100% of my health care is out of pocket. Zero of that comes from insurance or anything.
That's right.
There is, I mean, now there could be a situation if I had to go to the ER for some reason or something like that. Like, yes, that's why you need, emergency medicine is good and you need it, like, but when it comes to managing your health over the long term, the people who are going to manage it the most appropriately are the ones that are not the doctors that aren't stuck in the sick care system where the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies are running the show. And it's and the other thing that you said too that I really want to hone in on is that you now manage this, your blood markers and everything associated with this once a quarter. And this is exactly what I always tell people. I say, you need to manage the thing that is going to potentially kill you first. We talked about this yesterday on the phone, right? Like,
Yeah,
that's my motto. It's like, there's no such really and truly, like, we're on the cusp of things with longevity, but really all longevity really means is the absence of disease. Like, you can live without dying from one of the four big killers or whatever. And I tell people there's something typically in your genetics. You need to know what it is, and you need to come at it like a student and like your life depends on it, because it does. And you need to meet your doctor halfway, and you should know almost as much as he does, and you guys should, or more, and you should work
yeah,
together, and you should manage that on a consistent basis, so I,
yeah.
that the fact that you just kind of found your way into that, I think is what people that's a nugget that people should be taking from this, I believe. So
Well, I think a lot of it actually was predicated on my experience in the healthcare system as a clinician, right? Because as a respiratory therapist, there were things that I knew. Like, I'll give you a simple example. A patient that has congestive heart failure, if they forget to take a dose of their Lasix pill, right, to balance their fluid, and they're fluid overloaded, where's the only space in your body where fluid likes to go? Well, you've got two sacks of air called your lungs that you can those patients tend to experience what's called a flash pulmonary edema. And one of the most common ways that emergency medicine intervenes with that patient is they go over, they put a CPAP mask on them, which is right because they're placing positive pressure on the system to help force that fluid back. However, they apply it with oxygen. Now, what are we doing? We're putting we're putting that patient in an oxygen toxic state because it's not that they need oxygen, they just need pressure. And this is what I'm saying. So a lot of the stuff that I think about now when I'm working with a physician or I'm working with a patient that has come to me through a physician or something like that, and I'm trying to figure out how to help them optimize for their exactly what you said, like what are they targeting, right? I look at them holistically as like, okay, what are we doing? What have we done in the past? And then I try and pick up on those little nuances of like, well, did you think about just giving, for example, like what I'm just talking about, did you think about just giving them pressure without oxygen? Because there are devices out there that you can do this. And then like it dawns on them like, oh wow, like why didn't I think of that in the first place? And that's the thing is because our system's so antiquated and we think that just the next guy or next girl is going to pick up the buck that we
yeah.
pass on. Oh, they'll, so and so will catch it. They're a specialist. Well, really? Are they a specialist?
Yeah, it's paint by numbers. It's basically like da 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 da.
Yeah.
It's there's an art. If you look at like the best practitioners, there's an art, right? There's always the science, but it's the practitioner that says, okay, we know from the studies that this and this is the dosing, but for you, I think we're going to come in at half the dose because of
So
this or
good.
because of that, right? It's massaging this stuff and thinking, not being put in a box and doing,
Yeah.
But look, I wanted to get back to, I doubt this BPC pill was the thing that completely cured you of everything. I want to know, what else were you doing?
So it is kind of crazy though. So Leonard, he hands me this bottle of BPC. He's like, just start taking this once a day, every day, right? And I'm not kidding you. Within 7 days, 7 days, to the T, I pick up the phone and I call Leonard and I'm like, I don't know how to explain to you, but I can eat food again. I can eat food again. I can consume foods that I otherwise could not consume at all. And so for the as the this was, like I said, this was probably like towards the end of September, beginning of October of 2019. And as we start to round out the year, Leonard and I had gotten really serious about developing some pretty incredible peptide protocols that were leveraging. We were going to leverage supplements. There were a lot of things that we were doing because we wanted to converge on specific pathways so that we optimized and had a synergistic outcome, right? And so, just so I put this out there, I was patient zero for New BioAge.
Okay.
I effectively, in 7 months, went from 255 pounds, full disease process, to 181 pounds in 7 months, and had a complete and utter body recomposition. So I didn't just lose weight, which is fantastic. But the art that you just mentioned is, how do I maintain a maximum amount of muscle tissue while I'm taking this weight off so I can preserve this patient's valuable muscle tissue that we know muscle tissue and muscle strength are critical in morbidity, mortality rates, right? So we know
Yeah.
that those are like super, super valuable things. So here we go. We're rounding out the holidays and in 2019, and he's like, "Hey, so I'm ready to start this protocol with you come January." He's like, "What's your nutrition going to be like?" This is all he says to me. And my response back to him was old school Jesse. Oh man, these things are going to be magic, right? These things are going to just change my life, because had been so enthralled by what BPC had been able to do for me, and I knew some of the other stuff that I was going to be going on. So I was like, dude, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to continue the BPC. We're going to add CJC epimorelin. Like we're going to do these things, right? I got collagen, and like I was doing other stuff and preparing these things. And I was like, so I wasn't really going to change anything. And Leonard, all he responds to me, he looks at me, and if for those of you that know Leonard or have ever met him, he has this very stoic look of him at times, and he just looked at me and he just said, "Yeah, it's not going to work for me." And
Wow.
it hit, and there was the second hit. So it's like the first hit is like all of the health stuff that I had come home with that day that you referenced, and then the second one is like, here's my best friend saying to me, "Yeah, that's not going to work for me." And so that was in my head. 2 weeks later, or yeah, about 2 weeks later, it's January, and here, like, I'm like a few days away from getting my peptides, and I had committed that I was going to make a change. I just didn't know how. I had committed I was going to make the change, but I didn't know what I was going to be able to bite onto. And he had dropped a little dime. He had said, I really want you to consider this thing called a fasting mimicking diet, because you've been overfed for so long. This might really help you figure out how to eat more appropriately if we try this. And at the same time, the church we were going to asked us to do this 21 days of prayer and fasting, right? And I'm like, this has got to be like, this is like divine intervention, right? And in my belief structure, I was like, this is
Yeah.
divine intervention. I got to do this. I got to commit to this. So yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Prolon, but I
Oh
did a
yeah.
Prolon. I did a Prolon fast, and in that 5 days, what I found out about myself was, not only could I fast, but it was actually going to be the bedrock of which I built everything off of going forward, and that I leveraged to this day. But I do it in a way focusing on four things. I don't fast for weight loss or weight management. So I just want to be clear on that, because I think that a lot of people take fasting, and especially today, because it's become such a buzzword in our world of biohacking, or influencers, and cellular medicine. So it's like, that's not what I use it for. I look at it from, you know am I affecting autophagy? So am I amplifying autophagy or a cell recycling, right? Where the cells are going back into their programmed eating of themselves, right? uh,
Right. Cleaning up the
eh,
garbage and all of internal garbage in the cell. Yeah.
that's yeah, exactly. Am I increasing brain derived neurotropic factor to protect my brain function and amplify my cognitive well being? Right? Because I think that mental health, and more importantly, mindset, go hand in hand with fasting, and they become the actual base of this pyramid that we can build from a longevity standpoint. Right?
Yeah.
So, finding ways to amplify and turn up BDNF, managing cell senescence, which is, those zombie cells, I guess, is the way you need a certain level of zombie cell in the body, because it creates a certain amount of stress on the system, right? So you never want to completely kill cell senescence. That's also not good. That's the whole. If you're pulling on the lever for weight loss, you're actually going to break the metabolism in the wrong direction. And so
Yeah.
you don't want to pull on fasting like that, because you could actually have a problem from a cell senescence standpoint.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
not to derail you real quick, but just so that anyone who's listening to this, it might be like senescence, cell
Yeah,
senescence,
yeah,
zombie cells. What are they talking about? I mean, like correct me if I'm wrong here, but like senescent cells are cells that have been basically they've kind of forgotten their purpose. They sit there, they don't really engage in what they were supposed to do, and a lot of times it's because they could have been cancerous, and they shut down so that they don't replicate and they don't become cancerous. They basically say, we're just going to hold here. But the thing is they release inflammatory things, and they kind of influence cells around them to also start to give up. They're kind of like loiterers, right? So it's
yeah,
like a homeless cell that just sort of when
yeah.
encampments start, so to speak.
Yeah, that's it's so true. Yeah, and that's kind of why I think we call them zombie cells, right?
Yeah,
And I mentioned cell senescence before inflammaging, and the reason I say inflammaging instead of inflammation is because inflammaging is a newer term or a more nuanced term around low level chronic inflammation that you see when there is a certain volume of cell senescence that is present in that particular set of cell tissues or in that actual system, right? So with when it comes to that, I mean, you see these people, they're in their 30s. The doctor's like, oh, you have arthritis. What do you mean I have arthritis at 30, at 30 years old? And more often than not, what we see is just this chronic low level of inflammaging that is actually being caused by uncontrolled cell senescence. Like you said, these cells they hold, but now the two or three brothers that are next to that, they also become senescent when they were doing just fine, but that those toxic, off lifts were actually converting those cells into senescent cells as well.
yeah, and part of autophagy and this whole thing of fasting will basically these senescent cells will self-destruct. So they go through a pre-programmed death, apoptosis, and that's how
Right.
they get cleared, right? So what you're saying is that this balance, or this now we're getting into like metabolic switches like mTOR and AMPK and all that stuff. But
Yep.
basically, feeding and non feeding, the balancing those two and giving yourself breaks so that you're not just constantly turning on growth, 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 growth. Cells are like, we got so much growth going on. We need to shut these, I need to shut down because I'm going to become cancerous. And now you start having, aftermath of like a cascading of that, all just leading into chronic inflammation, autoimmunity, blah 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 blah. Right? Is this kind of
Exactly. And well, that's what that you just said. The trigger word for me was the autoimmunity. Is I can't tell you a number of times how many blood tests I had that kept saying because the doctors were saying, oh, you have celiac disease too, right? Well, what is that? So that being said, irritable bowel, celiac disease, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. You
you
take
probably
your
had
pick.
everything that originates from the gut. You probably had.
Right. So that being said, every test I was getting was actually coming back negative, Stephen, which was baffling the clinicians I was working with, which is not too surprising. But finally, I get an upper and a lower GI scope done. And it wasn't until that upper GI scope was done where they took a bite out of my stomach where they were like, yeah, this is positive for celiac. And this is all prior to 2020 starting on the peptide therapy, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just because you mentioned autoimmunity, and that's the thing is like you think about the normal, and I have to just say it, the standard American diet was essentially what I was eating, and the eating that standard American diet was killing me. It was legitimately killing me from a metabolic standpoint. And for other people, maybe it's diabetes. For other people, maybe it's cardiovascular. To your point, you said it, you got these four horsemen that are out there that really kill us. And I don't know that I'm predisposed to it metabolically. However, that's how it presented. So if I didn't target that and go at that full bore, and the way I went at it was with fasting. And so for months and months and months, I religiously committed to a pretty rigorous, prolonged. intermittent fasting schedule. So when I say prolonged intermittent, my eating windows were between 2 and 4 hours. So there were often days where I was significantly calorically deficited, obviously, but I focused solely on eating whole foods, and more importantly, I ate red meat. I ate a ton of red meat, and I ate boxes. I mean boxes of fermented leafy greens. So I would use a lot of balsamic vinaigrette, onions, and I would, and garlic, and then I would eat a box of that salad. I mean, like probably 4, 5, 6 servings of that salad to get a ton of fiber. And then I was eating bags every day of broccoli, 2 to 3 bags of
Yeah.
broccoli every single day. So
Yeah, so
uh,
cruciferous vegetables and animal protein. I mean, obviously you probably don't have cholesterol issues if you're eating that much red meat, I imagine, in your DNA.
No, my last lipid panel, which was just last month, in my last labs, my total cholesterol was 113. My ApoB was 50. And for those
Nice.
for listeners on the call, anything below 90 in your ApoB is good. It's a good goal
Yeah,
to have.
yeah.
And if you're not testing for your ApoB, you
Get on
probably
it.
should test. Yeah, you should
Get
definitely
on
do
it.
it.
I I'm gonna be doing probably a solo cast or some, YouTube video on my 10-year tenure through, learning how to manage my cholesterol uh, and sort of hopefully as a means of a template for someone to use to learn how to manage, take control, like we talk about, of their one thing that is probably going to kill them first if they don't manage it. But so where were we? We're on you're basically doing a warrior diet, right? You're eating one massive meal a day, or you're eating like cramming it into a two to
I
four
was
hour window.
cramming it in. Yeah, exactly. I was essentially like, I was like, look, I'm probably only going to be able to get one solid meal in this short period of time. On the 4.5 hour window days, I had a little bit more time to, but I ate a lot of nuts as well. And also, what I want to say about nuts, almonds, stuff like that, is I tried to identify nuts that had a ratio of higher in omega 3 to omega 6 variable,
Like a
right?
walnut, macadamia nut.
Perfect. Yeah, those were the two that I prioritized. I did back myself up with some almonds because I do enjoy almonds, but I definitely prioritize macadamia and walnuts there. And the reason I did that is because I learned by being proactive and kind of studying, like, okay, like what fats are good, because I'm not a big avocado guy, to be honest. And going from that standard American diet and the heavily processed food preparation, pre prepackaged foods, stuff like that, highly palatable, to eating a naturopathic diet, if you will,
Yeah.
that was not an easy transition. So I felt like a dietary restriction on what I actually had access to would actually lead me in a better direction. So, right, because there's different ways that you can kind of approach fasting. And for me, the most appropriate way seemed to be, a dietary restriction, especially because I love steak and eggs, and I found ways to love greens. But at the time, I eliminated fruits. I essentially eliminated carbohydrates from my diet at all costs, outside of, the
Vegetables.
the minor incremental ones I got from vegetables.
Yeah.
And I really relied heavily on animal meats, and that changed. But what's nice to know is that as your body restores its metabolic health and it becomes metabolically flexible again, where it can dive back and forth from using fat and carbohydrates as energy, right? Uh, I was able to happily reintroduce carbohydrates back into my diet without any problem. So today, and this, remember, like all of this started for me in 2021. We're about to go in, it will be officially 4 years that not only, remember, I had this switch happen in 7 months. So I've been living back metabolically flexible and healthy and, disease free for the large part of 3.5 years. And I think that that's almost a better story, if you will, or a better example of what what you can do if you actually take a proactive approach and take control over your actual well-being,
Yeah.
overall.
And like that was one of that's the reason why I wanted to have you on the podcast, is because there's so many people wanting and trying to improve their health or overcoming some health limitation or something.
Sure.
But I always say it all starts in the mind. It has to start here. Everything you want has to start in the mind, period. You have to make a decision and you have to want it. And you kind of started to go the route of what a lot of people do, it sounds like, in the beginning, when he gave you these peptides and it was like, oh, there's my magic bullet. All I need is my peptides, right? And it was like,
Yep.
no, no, no. Those sit on top of changes that you have to make. And so, when I imagine coupling the intermittent fasting, which required you to make a decision. It is not easy to do a fasting mimicking diet. That is not easy. I mean, once you get past the hump, then it gets easier, right? But that initial 3 days is like, man, it is terrible.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, what is critical about, if you're thinking about doing something like this, what's critical about the fasting mimicking diet is the level of toxicity that's in your body is pretty well apparent by day two and a half, day three, because the volume of headache and discomfort that you begin to experience is it's not comfortable, right? To say the
Yeah.
least. And I can tell you that I did not exercise for those 5 days. I was lethargic. I was frustrated. I was pissy, right? Like I was just a pissy person, and going from a lifestyle of you need to eat every day, like that whole old school is like breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and just like just living in a society that's overfed, right? Overfed and under muscled is what I would say our society is, right?
Yeah, where food is everywhere. Like literally, it is literally
Yeah.
everywhere. And you can eat, like you just fall into these rhythms of everyone just accepts it. You just eat constantly. You just eat wherever you are, wherever you are, it's time to eat, 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 And I do want to say this real quick. And I have another like little personal thing I want to throw in here. I recently had a run-in with gut health, and it's because I was trying. Have you ever tried kratom? Have we
Oh
talked
yeah,
about this?
I have no, but I have tried it.
Yeah, so there's these little shots called the feel free shots, right? And they're amazing. They're kava and kratom mixed. And I tried that about a year ago, maybe it's been longer than that, but about a year ago, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my god, I just feel like no ADD at all. Not that I really have bad ADD, but I don't like to sit at a computer and work. I'm standing right now. I'm active. You can probably see me the whole time you're talking, bouncing around.
Yeah.
But it gave me this contentness where I was just like, I could just work for hours. And it started like it's an opioid. So it slows down it starts to inhibit the motility, the contractions of your gut. So you stop moving food through there. And all of a sudden, I'm I was using these things, and I always keep things at kind of an arm's length away, but it didn't matter. Like I started having gut issues because of this, where I was like, I can just feel like I have no connection to my gut. Like I don't have it. And I even started like getting like this tiny little pooch for the first time. And actually went over single digit body fat for the first time
Yeah,
in,
we did talk about
yeah,
this. You're right.
maybe 15 years. The first time I was like, oh my God, like I'm actually putting on weight. Like what is going on here? And I said, nope, this is not happening. I was like, I am not, you know, everyone knows the premise. Your health starts in your gut. Like, all, is there. And I said, I'm not going to go down like this, like I'm a health professional. What the hell am I doing? So I just cut that stuff out. And, it's slightly addictive. A lot of times in this biohacking world, they talk about things like, oh, nicotine is a nootropic. Yes, it is. It is addictive. Do not be fooled. Kratom is addicted. It's an addictive. It's an opioid. Do not be fooled. So people are trying to sell things, and it's not easy to use those two substances without making it
Yeah,
habitual. And I fell into the trap of that. And now my gut's good. I'm now back down. I creep back down to single digit body fat. Not that this is vanity or single digit body fat, but that's a barometer for me. That is a
it's for
that
you.
it's
That's your measurement, and that's. I don't think that that's vanity at all. I mean, like that's one of your barometers and your measurement tool that you use to give you. I mean, like it's that was the alarm bell for you, right?
yeah,
So to me, that doesn't signal vanity, right? Like
yeah,
that at all. But I do want to say one thing because you mentioned about the ADD, not ADD, but interestingly enough, I actually recently got on maybe about 6 weeks ago or so. I started doing low dose methylene blue, 25 milligrams
love
of methylene blue
it.
tablets. Yeah,
Oh,
and
love it. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, as just one a day. I mean, you can do 1 or 2 capsules a day, but one a day. And the interesting thing is I actually did it because the studies suggested that it could have an impact on. I actually have a thalassemia minor. We were briefly talking about this before we jumped on today, and it affects my red blood cells. And I've chronically lived with low hematocrit and hemoglobin for the majority of my life, and been able to still be pretty functional. I'm currently I'm at the most functional level of health that I've ever been. I mean, I look back at that 23-year-old military guy, and I would absolutely and utterly just run circles around that dude. Run like literally just tear him to shreds. Mental fortitude, intestinal fortitude, strength, strength for body weight, pound for pound, just crush that 23-year-old Jesse version of me. So I took the methylene blue because I wanted to see if I could have an impact on the hemoglobin and hematocrit, right? Because there's some studies out there that say that there could be an impact on the actual hemoglobin aspect of the blood.
Can you explain
But
real
there,
quick what that does, just so for a listener who's like, hematocrit, hemoglobin, like just the quick.
Yeah. So hemoglobin is what carries oxygen, right? So it's like you only have so much of it in your body, and if you're not within normal levels, you just have less of the oxygen, folks, that can get on the bus to get dropped off at the tissues. Our tissues use oxygen as an energy, as a source to be able to function optimally. And so I wanted to boost that number up so that I could function more optimally, have an impact on my VO2 max, which is a very important predictor of overall longevity, health
Yeah,
span, wellness. And so that was really my target, right? Hematocrit is kind of the viscosity, the thickness of the blood. And when you think about that, think about your arteries and your veins. They're just gigantic. It's a gigantic plumbing system, right?
yeah,
So the volume of the blood and the thickness of the blood and the ability for those tubes to move that fluid through the circuitry impacts the efficacy of what you can do at the muscle tissue. And so if I'm really committed to this thing that is longevity and health span, then how do I optimize all of those things without creating some sort of a negative feedback, right? Like I want to balance and create homeostasis at all costs. And being that I have that, that genetic predisposition, there isn't balance there. So if I can find ways to balance that, I want to try and impact that. Does that
yeah. No, yeah,
kind of put it?
absolutely, 100%. Yeah. So methylene
But
blue, what did it do for
yeah,
you?
well, the cognitive thing. So there's this massive cognitive impact that methylene blue has. And I honestly, Stephen, I'm a huge, I love ketone esters, and ketone esters are kind of the fourth fuel. They're essentially a macronutrient without any sort of waste product,
Yeah,
right? It's like, it's like all bang and no, you don't have anything to like lose on it.
yeah.
But there's something to be said about the mental clarity, the clarity of mind, the ability to function at a high level for multiple hours on end, and more importantly, that it's smooth throughout the entire time. It's the only way I can kind of describe
I
it.
I totally agree with you. I'm on 20 milligrams of methylene blue right now. It is an MAOA inhibitor, so you're basically serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, like these levels are slightly elevated. But the thing I love about it, so you get that you just feel like mentally, I'm there. I'm totally capable. I'm
Connected.
100%. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then from the energy perspective, methylene blue can donate electron. It can give an electron. So you're quelling any of the reactive oxygen species that you produce while making energy, but you're also allowing the mitochondria to be more efficient to make more energy. Plus, you're also making yourself more photosensitive to light to make energy. So, like if you use red light, like 45 minutes or an hour after it, or go out in the sun. So, I methylene blue came to me in all these different angles at one point, and I
Yeah.
took a deep dive on it. And I have to say, it is one of the most surprisingly. It's one of those ones that I really I've had it. I've used it for a long time, but I never dosed it appropriately. Now that I'm dosing it appropriately, I'm like, I can't believe how amazing this supplement is because very few things give you what it gives you without cracking you out or screwing up your sleep. That's what I love
Yep.
about it. It doesn't mess
Yeah.
up it's just pure energy and it's clean and it feels great. I
It's
love it.
clean. It's
Yeah.
clean. Yeah. And so you said two things there that, getting outside, right? I know you do a lot of, we've talked about this. I know you love, like, you've got a red light access. I don't quite have that one yet, but so I
I
do
have
a
a
lot
ton
of
of
it.
red light stuff, but I
Yeah.
have always device, yeah.
Yeah.
But
So, but a lot, what I love to do, because you mentioned mitochondria, is leverage the power of really knowing my heart rate zones through metabolic analysis, which I'm certified in. I'm a coach in. I look at tests often. And then, so now because I know exactly what my zone two is, and the reason, and let me just share with your listeners, there's two zones in where we can effectively impact mitochondrial biogenesis and mitochondrial density, right? So when we talk about mitochondria as the battery pack of the cell, imagine if there was this drug, which we'll call exercise, right? That at the right dosage and under the right amount of time, because timing is the amount of time is critical, and I'll share that, but you actually have the ability to turn, let's just say, for easy understanding of battery size, right? Maybe you turn a double A battery or a triple A battery into a C cell or a D cell,
yeah.
right? So you talk about the amount of juice that that thing can put out when you want to put the throttle down in an exercise. And for some people, putting the throttle down is just going up a couple flights of stairs,
Yeah.
okay? And so I share that because you mentioned getting outside with methylene blue. And so that's a big love of mine. I call it my wilderness, man. It's like it's getting outside and for no less than 60 minutes. And I time it. Okay. So if I'm not in my zone two, it's not part of that 60 minutes. So when it comes to walking or a slow jog, like, I'm in that zone two for a bare minimum of 60 minutes. And what I do is I kind of play with the heart because my zone is large. Everybody's is different, but mine happens to be from 120 to about 155 beats per minute. I'm in my zone two. So I'm prioritizing fat kilocalories as an energy substrates, right?
Yeah.
And and then I'm also igniting that mitochondrial biogenesis and mitochondrial density. And now I'm leveraging the power of the methylene blue with that. And that's a lot of times where, like, I get some of my great ideas. I get home from my run and I'm like, I got to write this down, or I go and I do a deep dive on something that I've been studying. And I was listening to something on my run. And then as far as it comes to like a stationary bike, I want to be really intentional about this. It doesn't translate. Oh, well, Jesse said an hour. So if I do an hour on an assault bike or an hour on a stationary bike or an hour riding my bike with Mike, it doesn't translate quite like that. And so I want to be very intentional about saying that about zone two training. It is different based on the apparatus of which that you're using to traverse.
Interesting. Well, it's so
Yeah,
interesting because I got into all this zone, heart rate zone training back in 2010 after I retired, and I went and got like a friend of mine had an amazing clinic. He worked with like a top athlete like Jackie Joyner Kersey and Pete Sampras back in the day,
yeah,
and he did the whole metabolic testing with me, and I had I had no aerobic capacity because I came from gymnastics and I was all anaerobic. They're like, I'm doing the running test or whatever. They're like, how do you feel? I'm like, I feel fine. They're like, you're already anaerobic. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Like you're already, the test is over. you know?
Yeah.
And so they checked, they gave me a gait analysis and they gave me a heart zones in a training program. And I wore a heart monitor and I had this watch and it would beep if I went too high or beeped if I went too slow, right? If I ran too fast or ran too slow. So my heart had this zone I had to stay in. It was embarrassing. I was embarrassed. I was literally like, it was a walk with me marching in place like this. I mean, if anyone can see this, if they're watching it on YouTube, it was
So good.
pathetic, but I stuck with it. And eventually over the course of months, they kept, testing and removing. I could just run. I could just run indefinitely. I was like, I feel like I could just run forever. Oh my God, for the brain, it's like that's where all the problem solving, like figuring out your life, that's that runner's high, But I moved away from it, and now I've really, because of Peter Attia, like I finally just said, okay, fine, I
Yeah.
feel like I need to dive back into this. So
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of stationary bike stuff. I also have some pretty advanced. I have a Livo 2 Extreme thing I was on this a couple days ago where basically you can go put on a mask and you can be riding at 20,000 feet and then come back down to not even sea level but four
Oh,
times the
wow.
amount of air, so you can really hijack, like, your body's ability to upregulate
Train
oxygen.
high, sleep low,
Yeah, and
right?
it is phenomenal. I mean, that thing. I mean, I'll have to have the guy on the podcast because he would create. It's literally like, it's incredible. I don't even know where I'm going with this. The point I'm trying to say is that I've noticed I started now running again, and then sometimes I go to the bike, and I do feel that even if I do feel like I'm in a zone two, like it doesn't feel the same. It doesn't feel like I should approach them the same. And I have a rower, and you know what I mean. So
Yeah. The rower is even harder, right? And the rower and the assault bike become a bit of more of a challenge because, like, for example, with the rower, you're in kind of an augmented position, so you start compressing on the diaphragm, which is your primary
yeah,
breathing muscle. Your posture starts to become impacted if you don't have proper form. You just, there's some impacts there that can definitely interact with how soon you get into zone two and how fast you come out of zone two, right? So you're
gotcha.
even stroke speed, right? Even stroke speed on a rower. And then on an assault bike, the harder you pedal and pull on those arms, the more resistance you're adding. So now you're adding in resistance to something that is largely measured off of, a step. Like when we talk about metabolic analysis, it's like every minute I'm asking the patient or myself to increase my output in wattage, right?
Yeah,
And that's inadvertently also changing the substrate where your body's drawing its energy from. Is it going to use fat for energy or carbohydrates for energy, right? So on the stationary bike, I don't like to be outside of my zone two for less than an hour and a half, right? So it's a lot more of an aerobic. I have to spend more time in that aerobic capacity. And something I try and do so that I get the most amount of muscle contractions in that zone two on a stationary bike is I try and find a resistance that I can keep myself at that zone two heart rate in that zone two range with where my cadence is no less than 90. Okay, so we're talking turning my feet over a massive amount. Like, I think if I've got a cadence of 90, right, and cadence and resistance kind of like equals what your actual wattage
yeah,
output is. So if we were to, figure my average wattage output is right around 160 watts for no less than an hour and a half, keeping my heart rate at essentially 130 beats per minute. That's like, to me, that's like a perfect case scenario. But there's a lot that goes into being thoughtful and mindful about getting these outcomes, because for me, that's what I don't look at it for my pacing. I don't look at it for anything like that. For like the running, when we were talking about running, I don't care if it's a walk. Then if that walk is what marks my zone two, That's what I'm doing for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
So there's warm up involved where even in my warm up, I may allow myself to accelerate into zone 3 and zone 4 heart rates to kind of get the muscles, the tissues ready, to, get the juices flowing, so to speak, right? And then kind of have a short 2 to 3 minute cool down where I come all the way back to a zone 1, and then I start walking again according to that pace. And there's so many
Interesting.
ways. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's so many ways to like play with zone 2. You could do load bearing with rucksack. You could do it with a vest. You could. There's so much that people can do with zone 2 that
Dude,
really impact.
yeah. I mean, look, I'm gonna, I want to work with you on this. Like, I literally am like, I'm like looking for
That's so
somebody
cool.
that can guide me on this because I think when it comes to like weight training and calisthenics and all that stuff, I mean, my God,
You're a beast.
I'm done.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, I'm not done, but I'm always curious. But all my mobility, all that stuff, it's good. But I need a little bit more expertise and help. Do you? Could someone from this podcast literally reach out to you and be a client of you and your guys
Yeah.
for this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from a metabolic testing standpoint, I mean, obviously, if you're local to us, I can definitely coordinate that. We actually have two portable metabolic devices that we have at my local gym that my coach owns. So we worked with him. We all, kind of went through study together and went through, courses together, got certified, licensed on this stuff, and that's where a lot of this lab work, if you will, kind of started. It was just a bunch of guys in the garage like trying to figure some stuff out, and that, but like really understanding the efficacy. And you mentioned Peter Attia. Look, it would be lost on me if I didn't say that we learned a lot of this. We pulled these snippets, you know, but we're also clinicians, right? So you've got a very well-to-do coach that really knows body movements, mobility, flexibility, optimizing from that standpoint. You've got me, who from a respiratory standpoint understands metabolic analysis. I mean, for example, it doesn't do me any good to find out somebody's do metabolic analysis on them and then start prescribing them exercise if the very first thing I identify is that they have a respiratory limitation, right? So if I identify while I'm doing their metabolic analysis that there's a respiratory limitation, my initial prescription is going to be, hey man, we need to, you may not want to hear this, but we're going to have to do some real boring stuff involved in mobility, flexibility, breath work, inspiratory and expiratory muscle training, things that people largely leave out, and they just don't know how to breathe, Stephen. That's what we found by doing this metabolic testing. But yes, to
Yeah,
answer your question, they can reach out to me directly. They can do, we'll maybe in the show notes, we'll put like my email address and my contact
absolutely.
and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Because
But
you're a
I
metabolic
founded,
beast. I mean,
yeah,
you're a wizard with this stuff. I mean,
I
it's amazing.
founded Outlaw Health, and it's called Optimization Outlaw Consultants. And most of what I do is like, you think about this, doctors aren't necessarily, even doctors that are in our space aren't necessarily the best at getting the information out there to the patient. And something that I'm really good at, it's why I do what I do in New BioAge as a professional in business development, is I try and help educate patients so that they're educated when they find these doctors that are in their area that are doing the forward leaning and the proactive medicine. I'm now sending these doctors educated patients that under, you said it right, like they know what has to be done. They just need the path to get to these people.
Yeah,
And I want to make sure that they're not just, they're not just going to some random clinic that specializes in weight loss, because as I mentioned before about fasting, like that's just going to break them.
yeah,
It's not going to optimize them for the things that you and I have been talking about optimizing people for today, you
yeah.
know. And so I'm actually working with a patient right now, focusing with her on zone 2 training, and talking about like prioritize. It's hard when you talk to somebody about optimizing their nutrition for macros, right? Trying to get somebody to even track any macros is hard, let
Yeah.
alone all three of
So
them,
hard.
right?
Yeah.
So if I can, at the very least, at the very least, if I can get them connected to a local gym or local pharmacy that probably has an in-body scanner or they have access to a DEXA scan, those are the only two clinically that I am for or pro. I'm not a StyQ guy. I'm not all of these like cutesy AI, scanners out there that while they
Yeah.
look really good and market really well, they don't give me the actual data that I need. And the data that
Yeah.
I need comes from an in-body scanner or a DEXA scan. And so we happen to use an in-body. We work with in-body often because they give us a lot of really valuable data. And matter of fact, we just found this out. The BMR that comes up, or the basal metabolic caloric intake that's recommended on InBody, seems to correlate really, really well when we do an actual RMR. It's off, within a standard deviation, but it correlates really well when I run an RMR on my PNOE test, which is our metabolic analysis test. So I do an RMR on them, which is a 10-minute resting test, and it gives me an
Uh-huh.
idea of like four hallmarks of their overall metabolic health. And then we do the actual fitness test. And I can meet anybody on a fitness test where they're at. If they are totally deconditioned, we put them on a stationary bike. If they're a runner, then we obviously want to focus on putting them on a runner, right? We've even started to put people that are doing like more of this. You see a lot of these extreme marathons, right? These ultra runners,
Yeah.
and they do a lot better running out in the open. So we kind of have a backpack that we can put the PNOE in, and we can actually have the patient or the client run with the metabolic analyzer on in an environment that's more conducive to the style of training that they're going to do.
Wow,
So it
that's
gives us
pretty
an
cool.
accurate measurement, right? And I look, when it comes to zone two, the other thing I'll say is this: is if I just sat here and say, hey, I need you to do zone two training 4 days a week, your fat max heart rate is 123 beats per minute. Do you think you're going to realistically going to consistently do that, Stephen, for an hour, 4 hours a week? Are
I mean,
you
I
going to
probably
commit
would,
to?
but I'm probably not the run of the mill. Like I like to adhere to protocols, and I found a way to stay involved with boringness when it comes to exercise. But most people probably get bored, I imagine, right?
Yeah, and so they're like, well, is there anything else that I can do? Because if they're not, especially with zone two, it's one of those things like it's an adaptation. When you're training zone two, I really want to get across to the listener, you are training in a metabolic adaptation, okay, and it takes time. It takes time under that curve to actually create that adaptation to start creating that metabolic flexibility for for your overall metabolic fitness, right? And
Yeah.
so it's like it's good to kind of string out like, yes, you have fitness, and fitness I think more gets coupled with like performance, right? But when I'm talking about metabolic fitness, I'm talking about metabolic fitness that's more tied to longevity and health span. That's what I like to work with people on in zone two training. So
Yeah.
I train people at something called their fat max, right? Which is that lower end. It's kind of the as you leave zone one, it's the highest amount of kilocalorie burn you're going to get for fat substrate. But then
Which means that when you're training at fat max, you're burning the maximum fat. Like you're at the limit of what you can burn as fat as fuel before you switch.
right. Yeah, and so for you, that's not necessarily optimal because here we are running at single digit body fat. So like that shouldn't be the goal with our zone two training with
Hmm.
you. So what I would actually do, and I think you and I talked about it a little bit yesterday, is I was mentioning to you something called the MAF, or maximum aerobic function. And this is something that his name is Dr. Phil Mathilton. I really love his work. He's trained a lot of elite athletes, more importantly, elite cyclists and runners and stuff, but predominantly cyclists. And he takes such a different and nuanced approach to what maximum aerobic functioning is. And I found for people like you and I who maybe don't really necessarily need to manage fat burn because our body fat is optimized, right? We're always talking about optimizing. What if a sweet spot for zone two is actually training at this MAF, which is maximum aerobic. It's the higher end of zone two. It's maybe 8 to 10 beats off of going into zone three. And what we find in the literature, in his literature specifically, and in his outcomes, is training at that heart rate actually led to people, if they decided to go out and go for a race or go compete, they were faster, they were stronger, they had better outcomes overall by training at that MAF than they did just training in some sort of arbitrary level of zone two. And so,
Interesting.
simply put, for guys like you and I, we would be a class C. We talked about this yesterday, and a class C is taking 180 beats per minute and just subtracting your age. Instead of, historically speaking, we used to go from 220 beats per minute, which was considered to be maximum heart rate. We start 40 beats lower and then subtract our age from there. And
And that gives you that the
that
180
MAF.
MAF. Interesting.
Yeah. So, and there are nuances, and there's actually an equation that's involved that brings in, if you have a history of cardiovascular issues, so CVD, or if you're on certain medications. You mentioned MAOH, or you mentioned like SSRIs earlier, right? So we actually know that people that are on SSRIs or antidepressants, their VO2 max is actually subdued. They actually are inhibiting a portion of their maximum capability from a VO2 max standpoint.
Interesting.
So yeah, so there's a component there that if you can train at these different volumes of zone two, I think that not only you can make it more enjoyable, you can find a lot more consistency being adhered to. You mentioned protocols, right? And
Mhm.
you can find a lot more joy from doing these zone two trainings, where it doesn't seem like it's becoming monotonous, and it's
Yes.
something that's sustainable over lengths of time.
Yeah, you're right, because I do actually I started on a bike zone 2, and now I'm running zone 2 because I was like, I don't feel like sitting on and I even have a bike. I have one of those Concept 2 bikes with a like this desk thing that sits on top of it. I can put, I could work there at my laptop if I wanted to, and I thought, okay, this is great and everything, but I just feel like I'm not going to grind on that thing for 4 hours a week for
Yeah,
indefinitely. Like, it's just not going to happen. So, what I would love to do is, there's a lot of places that are popping up now that are these places where you can get a DEXA scan and a RMR, resting metabolic rate, and a VO2 max test, all at the same location. And they have one here in Vegas. So I'm going to go down and I'm going to get both of those done, all of it done, like the full suite. So the RMR and the VO2 max, and then I'll do the DEXA scan. I
cool.
would love to have you take a look at it, and whatever you recommend, I will do. I will literally film it, whatever. I would like to make like a little, like I'll almost like I would like to go through what you're saying, because
Yeah,
you really, you know, we know this stuff is important, but you understand it at the level that is, you have experience and you have a really good knowledge to know the art of it, and that's the people that I like to work with, or like
yeah, sure.
study, where it's not so just putting you in a box and just do this and then just do this. It's like, well, there's a gradient here in this zone too, and we can play with this. And even when I run, I notice that, like, okay, at this pace, I feel like I could probably run indefinitely. I can breathe through my nose. I feel like I could keep this up forever. But there's something a little bit beyond that, where I feel like this is kind of a little bit more where my body wants to be, but yet it's flirting with that zone 3. And sometimes I got to back off a little bit, but it's like, it's just, you know what I mean? Is
That's
that
so good. Yeah. That's you hit it on the muster. And if we fine tune and identify and train more in that MAF, what's going to happen is that pace that you're triggering on right now, that is probably pushing you into zone three, will stretch that zone two up there. So when you get to that pace, you're not throttling into zone three, because that's where the shift happens, right?
Yeah.
Now you're shifting into that cardiopulmonary work, right? So now the cardiopulmonary is being affected. I want the listeners to understand, like, zone two and zone five share a lot of similarities, where zone 3 and zone 4, they have some similarities. However, zone 4 is kind of unique in that appropriately training intervals in zone 4 actually can have a really positive impact on VO2 max,
Hmm.
because you start to actually bump up and push up that top end of your max heart rate. So my max, the last time I actually had my metabolic analysis measured, which has been probably about 6 months now, my max heart rate was at 184 beats per minute. And if you're going off of Phil Appleton's, studies, right? That's that's really good, right? Because he considers a max heart rate of 180 at birth, right? And so here I am, I'm starting to get closer to 40, and that max heart rate's at 184. So that metabolic flexibility, and I start to enter the zone of work at 123. So I'm able to burn more calories at a heart rate where the work is worth it. Because when I real quick, I just want to go back to when I was eating those one warrior meals a day, right? And dropping the carbs out. This is kind of the devil that's in the details, right? About fasting for the wrong reasons, right? Or fasting too long and overdoing it, because we can overdo anything. Too much of a good thing is not a good thing at all. But at one point, my zone 2 had stretched to from 106 beats per minute all the way up to 155, 156.
Wow.
So I had a massive, massive zone
Wow.
2. I didn't have to work at all to get into my zone 2. I could literally do about a 3 mile an hour walk and get right into my fat max heart rate, never had to put a vest on, and just destroy fat, like chomp through body fat. But it was amplified because I had it completely eliminated carbohydrates in my diet. Now, the lifestyle I live, where I'm way more metabolically flexible, and I do include good carbohydrates in my diet more frequently, especially fruits, that fat max is 123 beats per minute. So it takes a little bit more effort for me, but I actually think that that's the goal when it comes
Yeah.
to zone 2 training,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I think that, that's the thing is, when people get a protocol and everyone tries to say like they sort of say, "Oh, like everyone should be on this or everyone should be on this." It's like, no, no, no. Where are you? Like, if you're coming at it like you were, where you were 50 pounds overweight, or you had 50 pounds of fat
Yeah,
potentially to lose, or whatever it is,
yeah.
this fasting and zone 2 combo was great, but at some level, once you lose all that fat, now you've gotten you should train in a position where you're going to find yourself in a position where you need carbs. You can't get stuck in that forever. Like I always tell people, like, you want to eat carbs. I mean, like train, like work out, like do some resistance training, and you're going to need that. Like, if you try to not eat carbs and you try to work out forever, you're going to hit a wall. You're going to bonk, right?
You feel
The
like dirt.
Yeah, the goal is to be flexible. The goal is to be like, I can eat carbs, I process them really well, or I can switch to fat when I don't eat carbs. Like, it just all, you know,
That's
is
the
that
joy of where I'm at. Yeah, that's the joy of where I'm at, and I really welcome that now, because I was hardcore, like, well, you just got to intermittent fast. Well, you just got to intermittent fast, and the reality is if you're doing it for the wrong reasons, again, if you're doing it with this focus of a fad diet trend that is fasting for weight loss, you're going to find yourself broken just in an opposite direction.
yeah.
You know, one thing, when you were talking about lipids and cholesterol and stuff, I almost wonder, it would be interesting, because Leonard, our founder at New BioAge, he actually has three of the four obesity genes. We went through genetic testing, and I mean, he really had some serious, extensive genetic testing done to find out, because he's predisposed to having really bad lipid panels, specifically ApoB. And he actually takes one of our supplement. We formulated a supplement specifically because of his background, right? It's
Uh-huh.
called Syntranol LNA, and it's these are human outcomes. Okay, total. And I know like there's some the most important thing I want to draw out is it's going to impact all of cholesterol, but in some people on this podcast may not necessarily agree with modulating and decrease cholesterol because, like LDL, for example, impacts the immune system, right? So you don't want to necessarily have LDL too low because it has a direct response on your abilities, on your body's immune system to effectively fight whatever is going on. So, but I do want to be intentional about saying that it reduced it's Citronal showed it's just a supplement, right? It's got Citronal 300 milligrams. It's got Nobelatin in it, right? And that's really it's these
I
the
don't know what that is.
tocotrienols.
Nobelatin.
It's actually from the rind, for the skin of orange peels.
Okay.
And it's just naturally occurring in nature. It's just something that we tear it off the orange and we throw it out. But it's tang I can't even pronounce it, tangerinitin, but it's called Nobelatin. And we also have tocotrienols. It's got low dose leucine in it. And the interesting thing about leucine, before I tell you the percentages of reduction of triglycerides and ApoB, right? The interesting thing about leucine is I'm sure you and I have both heard it. Leucine is an anabolic,
Yeah.
thought to be this anabolic mindset, right? But most of the time, if you actually look at the dosage of which that amino is being delivered, it's over 3 grams, right? You're getting leucine at 3+ grams in whatever BCAA or
Yeah.
whatever amino you're. So, but low dose leucine was actually shown to activate the SIRT1 gene, which actually hyper, it improves insulin sensitivity. So you get the opposite effect, right, of
Interesting.
what not normal leucine dosage does. So to the triglycerides, it reduced triglycerides by 34%. And then it also had a significant impact on reducing ApoB, but specific to Leonard, it actually reduced Leonard's ApoB in 6 weeks by 20%. Okay.
That's great. I
Uh,
mean, it's of interest to me. I know we've talked about
yeah.
this product, like cholesterol is my thing, and it's something that
Yeah.
I am managing every quarter. I run my own blood labs. I look at it back to the thing we talked about. Know the thing that's going to kill you first and manage it, and there's a still a lot of conflicting views on cholesterol. You have
It
Peter
is. Yeah.
Attia, and you have some other people that are like, they'll tell you cholesterol doesn't matter. It does not matter. They'll tell you, studies will show that people that have heart attacks or myocardial infarctions, whatever, like half of them have low cholesterol, half of them have high cholesterol. So it doesn't matter. And
Right.
I just don't come from that camp. I really don't, because not to go down a whole rabbit hole of cholesterol. I think that's probably left best for a different podcast or whatever. But the thing that you're showing us is that you guys have made these supplements that really not only do well for ApoB or people that have worried about cholesterol, but they kind of work really well with a lot of your protocols that you offer. Like, and you guys are really, I mean, we didn't even get a chance to get into peptides, which is like one
I
of my
know. I know.
favorite things in the world to talk. We'll have to have you back and do like a peptide one, because I think anyone that is listening to this podcast is going to be like, this guy's a wealth of information. And this is what I thought. I'm like, you're not anywhere out there, and I want you to come on the podcast. And a lot of these podcasters, they invite people on because they have big followings or they want to sell some of their products and make a commission. And my
Sure.
opinion was like, this is a guy that I like talking to, that I confide in, who has helped me, who I find that I call on like a fairly consistent basis now. We have incredible conversations, and I'm like, I just think that there's no way I'm the only one in the world that's going to think that. I think that you served our country, you overcame practically needing a liver transplant. You picked yourself
Yeah.
up. You put yourself back together. You've come from the sick care system. You're now in the real healthcare
Well care.
system.
Yeah.
You're living it, you're doing it, you're helping people, and you have this, specialty that you're really up to speed on exercise and fasting and peptides and supplementation. I mean, those are strong suits, to be good at in this day and age. And I know, we went, I think I could talk to you for like easily another hour. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to, I mean, if anyone's listening, hopefully you've gotten to the end of this and you realize what this guy has in him, and you should tell us where can they find you? How can they
Yeah,
work with you?
yeah.
And again, a little bit about if you could just briefly say like, well, what companies you work with and what they do.
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, New BioAge Wellness Network is predominantly and focuses right now on prescribers and medical doctors that are looking to have an actual wellness network that that isn't just a compounding pharmacy. Because while we are a network of pharmacies, which we are, and we compound peptides, there is a lot more to it because physicians that are getting into this space or have maybe even gotten into this space over the last several years, they they have an idea of what peptides are and cellular medicine is, but they're not necessarily like 100% schooled in outcomes, leveraging cellular pathways. You just mentioned, finding and identifying supplements specific even to dosages that actually activate or coincide with the same pathways that the peptides so that you actually get a synergistic impact and effect, right? Or if you didn't have the peptides, you could still leverage a lot of the supplements within New BioAge Network, right? to to activate some of these pathways that the peptides do. So either way, like if you're not keen on going the peptide route, you could still go the peptide enhancing supplement route where you're activating a lot of these similar pathways that we've talked about today.
And
So
that's New Age Bio,
it's
NUAGE by BIO.
it's a NUBIOAGE, New BioAge. Yep,
Okay.
so they could even go to the what I'll do is I'll send the link to you so that if I didn't already send that link to you now, I'll send that link to you so that you can send them right. They can go right to that so they can learn a little bit more about the supplements, but patients as well, right? Like if somebody was interested in taking the supplement aspect and they weren't going the peptide route, obviously they need to get prescribed through a doctor, at least if they're working with us in New BioAge. From a finding me aspect, they can actually go to outlaw underscore health. That's where I'm at on Instagram, and that's where I do a lot of my posts. Specifically, we talked about exercise and training, so that's a lot of what I like to leverage my Instagram for is talking about zone two. I definitely talk about peptides on there as well, but I really, really, really hone in on you know why training even with a rucksack is so critical. I mean, talk about inadvertently creating an adaptation to improve bone density, right? When you start going down the rabbit hole of what kills people, right? It's a slip and fall, Stephen. It's a slip and fall when you're 60, 65, 70, 75 years old. You fall, you break your hip, or you break your leg, or you tear a ligament in your shoulder or something like that. You go in to get this restorative surgery or some sort of repairing surgery, and while that happens, you either obtain an infection, or even if you don't obtain an infection, there's risks of blood clotting because we just talked for an hour about people are massively deconditioned and they don't even realize it, right?
Yeah.
So metabolic analysis just understand. And so a lot of times what I tell people, even if they don't have the ability to go and get a metabolic test, all I ask you to do is get off of this podcast, go and take a walk and find a pace, like tell yourself you have somewhere to be, and I want you to find a pace that's fast enough that it becomes hard to recite a conversation, right? Where you cannot continue that conversation without either A, slowing down, or B, losing your breath, right? And somewhere in that range, right? If you need to be tracking your heart rate, right? That's going to be where your zone two is. That's separate from just knowing your MAF, right? Because your MAF is a little bit more complicated to know if you're metabolically deconditioned. You and I, like I said, we're easy because we're doing all of the things. So it's very easy for us to take 180
Yeah.
minus 40. So my MAF's right around 140. Simple, right? But there's so many complexities that come into that. So Outlaw Health is where I talk a lot about this stuff. And I, sometimes I do it in stories. I definitely have become more and more active as I've grown in new bioage, and I've branched out from the prescriber, kind of stepping out from teaching the prescriber and the practitioner.
Uh-huh.
Now it's really honed in on like teaching the patients, like understanding that if I'm going to be this guy for people, that I have to put it out there and tell my story like you've given me the opportunity to do today. And you just, until somebody gives you that time to really tell your story, there's, you don't know if what you are and the things that you're, it's not that I don't know the things I'm doing are right because my body's telling me they're right, but more importantly, the impact that what I'm doing can have on people. You don't know that unless, and for my situation, you meet somebody like yourself at a Peptide World Congress, and that says, you know what, like people need to actually hear about this from outside of my perspective, right? And I think that that's unique, and I think it's powerful, and I think that that's part of what we're built for because we're built for community. We're not built to try and figure these things out alone, you
Yeah, I
know?
mean that's why I started this podcast. I was like, I don't want to be just sitting in a room on a computer by myself. I want to be interfacing with people like yourself, and I think your story is awesome. I have one more question for you. And look, I will put everything on the show notes at stephenmccain.com/. Should we do new bio age or should we do outlaw?
Let's do out. Let's do outlaw because I want them to be able to get over to Instagram and be able to start
Okay.
interacting with me that
Okay.
way.
Yeah, we'll do so everything will be at stephenmccain.com/outlaw. And then
Yeah,
all the links to everything you'll be able to find Jesse,
cool.
and show notes, the video version of this, anything we discussed. But if you could tell that 23-year-old military guy, if you could go back in time and tell him something that what would you tell him?
I would tell him there's a military saying that I lived by. There was two actually that I lived by. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast, and complacency kills. And but today it's much different for me. Complacency kills, but consistency revives. So that's what I would tell that 23-year-old is it may be true that complacency kills, but consistency revives. And I'm a testament to that. I definitely would love to sit down with that 20-year-old, 23-year-old version of myself, and I might even have a beer with him.
That's awesome. Well, Jesse, man, so appreciative of you. Like you've done a lot of help with me on phone calls. Teaching me some things that I really was wanted to know to help some family members and stuff. And I just look forward to getting to know you, having you back on the podcast. We could talk about so many more things, but I think people, follow Jesse. You should definitely be checking out Outlaw Health on his Instagram. And if someone wants to if you want to increase your metabolic health, man, this guy clearly knows what he's talking about. So thank you
Yeah.
so much, Jesse. And did you want to say something?
I do, if somebody goes and they get their metabolic fitness done wherever they're at and they want to bring that, I do consult for that. So we'll link them to that. They can just send me an email, and I set it up with them on that. And, I usually do like a 15-minute consultation with them to get an idea of what they're looking to do. And then if it's something that's a little bit more in depth, we set up a time to do calls and establish kind of like a patient care relationship, if you will.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, I mean, I'm going to be taking you up on that myself, but
Let's go.
yeah, let's do it. So, thanks for joining us, Jesse. I really appreciate the time. And, again, thank you for your service and sharing your story. Really just moving stuff. And thank you everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and check out everything in the show notes at stephenmccain.com/outlaw OUTLAW, and we will see you on the next episode. Take care and stay healthy, guys. Cheers.